Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 11th SingaporeConnect COVID-19 Forum. Many thanks for joining us here again as we move into a fortnightly cycle. This evening, we actually have a rather packed agenda with three major topics. Of course, we'll be going through our pre-call survey and sentiment check, but the core elements of our agenda include the updates from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the national broadcast by our Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, as well as some of the cabinet ministers. And then we're going to have a very special update from Advisory Singapore. We're going to introduce you to Eugene, who's going to tell us a little bit more about this mentorship initiative. And then finally this evening, we're going to have with us an education update on summer school and college prep from the team at Flex College Prep as well. So that will be Dan KWON. So let's just get started because it's such a huge agenda. And once again, we're super excited to have this partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore Global Network, as well as SingaporeConnect coming together with this community over all these weeks to be along with us in this journey, right? As we live and understand a little bit more about COVID-19. So it seems that in Singapore, we've been doing a number of broadcasts to get Singaporeans updated on what we must do to live with COVID-19, how we can maintain our relevance, keep the economy competitive, as well as assuage some of the concerns about the path forward for Singaporeans. So I think giving us an update this evening and a summary of these very important national broadcasts are Daryl as well as Hui Hui. Would you guys like to take it from here? Daryl or Hui Hui, you might still be muted.
Hi, Jess, Hui Hui here. Sorry, could you just continue first? I'm trying to get CG online. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. So let me just start with the pre-sentiment survey, pre-forum survey on the sentiment that we have as well. What's interesting is in terms of the community feedback so far, we have a lot of folks who are here sheltering in place, right? Some of you actually have even come back, gone back to Singapore, and we have a small sliver of one or two of you who have not just gone back to Singapore, but returned to the US as well. So we have some stories there about how some of us have, actually left US and returned back to Singapore. That's awesome. To the United States, that's awesome. And then, of course, many of us are still here sheltering in place. In terms of the overall estimation of the shelter in place, in terms of the path forward, it looks like many of us are having a slightly more bleak perspective, thinking that this is going to last for another 12 weeks. In terms of the journey ahead of us, it seems many of us are thinking that there might be a wave 2 and that we actually need to continue sheltering in place for many more weeks. In terms of the situation in Singapore, I think when we last spoke 2 weeks ago, it was at 34,000 cases with about 23 deaths, unfortunately. And in these next 2 weeks here, as of today, the latest update we have is that we now have 40,000 cases, as well as 26 deceased, so 3 more who have passed away in the past 2 weeks. So I think overall, though, it looks like the cases have come down. We have more and more who have been discharged. And I think in a sense right now, in terms of the number hospitalized, we really, in the critical phase, we have 2, which is great considering the size of the population and the number that are actually hospitalized as well. So we're getting these numbers directly from Ministry of Health. Any of you would like to continue to track and follow, that would be a great place for you to leverage the resources there. Our level of elevation in terms of concern is still orange. However, I think as many of us know, circuit breaker is sort of loosening up, and we're starting to look at how we can restore normality, right, in Singapore. But as the ministers have been trying to explain as well, this new norm is changing as well. and we need to be prepared for this new future. I think Daryl and Hui Hui give us a sense of that too. So in terms of the sentiment on the healthcare system, from a US side, since the past 2 weeks, we see now an uptick of concern. I think many of us are seeing that the cases in California have continued to rise. And around the US after Memorial Day, we've been reading about more cases, right, happening as well, which has been of some concern. Conversely, in Singapore, we actually have at least among us here, in terms of our perspectives, we feel that Singapore is going to be less likely to be overwhelmed by COVID at this point. So that speaks to the confidence we feel about Singapore at this point as well. Can I just check, Hui Hui, is Daryl with us now?
Hi, Jasmine. I'm on. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Daryl. So it's been really exciting that the Singapore government has put together a series of national broadcasts that I believe started, right? We've read 4 so far, and we'll be running to the 20th of June. This is actually great because we're hearing direct from Singapore leadership on what's happening and some of their plans for the future. Daryl, can you give us a quick summary and of what's going on in Singapore with respect to some of these national broadcasts and what our leaders have been communicating to the population? Maybe from a SingaporeConnect perspective, I can, speaking on behalf of the community here, we're delighted to do what we can to help, right? Singapore get back on track too. If there's things that we can do to support this particular learning opportunity and help Singapore get back on our feet there, do let us know as well, because he was talking a lot about overseas learning and different retraining opportunities, especially on the digital tech side. So, please feel free to reach out to us, Daryl, and see how we can help over here and strengthen that partnership as overseas Singaporeans.
Thanks for that. I think we'll certainly need to, reinforce our connections with the various Singaporean groups that are already established, like yours. And you guys have been, you guys have been a wonderful asset in the times like this. So let's continue this partnership. Yes.
Absolutely. And, in fact, this evening we invited Advisory Singapore to talk about some of the mentorship opportunities that our people here in the Valley can have with some Singaporeans as well, students. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because we've invited the leader there to join us. Meanwhile, I do have a question that's come in from our folks here. One question from Poe, and it's around when Singapore is going to remove the 2-week quarantine when we go back. Any indications of that, Daryl? Got it. Thank you. So we'll continue to monitor the situation as we go on, and that's, I think it's a conservative approach, right? While keeping our trade channels open. I think that was one of the key messages we heard from the ministers as well. Keeping that open economy, ensuring that our supply chains are open, but being very careful about opening the economy and circuit breaker. That's great. Thank you so much, Daryl. Any parting words before we move on to Advisory Singapore? Well, thank you so much, Daryl. I know Daryl's going to be around here for a little bit more as well. So if there are more questions on the Singapore ministerial speeches, which will be continuing, I believe, right? There are a couple more coming up. I'm just going to put up the calendar again. Again, all these speeches are available on YouTube. I've provided the link. We've provided the link here. And then, of course, we have 2 more sessions coming up. One is a stronger and more cohesive society, and the other one is on emerging stronger together. Really exciting, very well put together, I thought, in terms of highlighting some of the key concerns that we have as a population, and also addressing how, I think I thought Minister Chan talked a lot about how the outreach to overseas made a big difference, and it made me feel good about how maybe we can help, right, as overseas Singaporeans too. So keep a lookout for some of these sessions, people. And in the meantime, let us move on to Advisory Singapore, because that maybe gives us a good forum to consider how we might be able to give back to Singapore. So one of the questions we asked as well was how many people might be interested in helping. So we have certainly about a third of us saying they're interested in learning more about mentoring students. Another third is certainly keen on finding career mentors and folks, and we have certainly a bunch of us here are still trying to learn more about what actually this mentorship is about. And so not sure if we can actually participate. So I'd love to take this opportunity to introduce a key member of Advisory Singapore, I believe the founder of the initiative, Mr. Mok Eugene. Eugene?
Hi, Jasmine. Thanks for having me today, and good evening to all of you. Thanks for coming on a Sunday evening and sharing with us your time, and thank you for having me today. I just wanted to share a bit more, as SGN has asked, about sort of advisory, who we are, what we do, and sort of some of the things that we've been doing in this time of COVID-19. And I'll talk a bit about, how you can get involved as well if you'd like to. So I think the key question that we asked when we started advisory was, how do we ensure that young Singaporeans from all walks of life have the support they need to make informed career and further education choices and can pursue their aspirations? In other words, how do we make sure that the family you come from, the school that you go to, or your socioeconomic background is no barrier to your ability to pursue your aspirations and to have a successful and meaningful career? Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. Thanks. So for that reason, we started with a needs analysis methodology way back in 2016 to understand where we could best plug gaps, including surveying students, doing personalized interviews with them, and understanding what already existed on the ground. Next, please. So these were the 4 uncertainties that we felt that Singaporean students between the ages of 16 and 25 were facing and still face to this day, even with new initiatives coming up. For example, My Skills Future, that's run by Skills Future and the Ministry of Education, as well as other initiatives in this space. And for us, it was really about finding ways to plug these 4 uncertainties, which have only gotten worse as COVID has sort of made a lot of academic terms and sort of summer prospects and job opportunities very uncertain for students, not just in graduating cohorts, but those who are currently studying as well, many of whom continue to attend school in alternating weeks. Next, please. Mm-hmm. For this reason, we started Advisory as a fully youth-led nonprofit dedicated to supporting young Singaporeans and level the playing field. For us, we are a team of 45 full-time students based on 3 continents. We've been doing this for 4 years now. It's been quite the journey, and we've been very grateful for the support received from working professionals, not just in Singapore, but those based abroad too. Next, please. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the work that we've done pre-COVID, just to give you a context, and then I'll talk a bit about some of our COVID initiatives. In 2017, we launched our online repository of interviews with working professionals to give students a sense of what kinds of occupations and industries exist that Singaporeans and friends of Singapore are working in. And to date, we've had about almost 100 articles that have been viewed more than 151,000 times. And this is one way that working professionals can give back to us by sharing their stories online with us. Next, please. So some of the stories that we shared include Conversations, our interview series with young professionals that spotlights more on the types of work that they do and sort of getting rid of misconceptions about industry. Next, please. We also have a series called Reflections, which features more senior individuals. So if you are at the apex of your career, you're close to retirement, you want to pass on your learnings to young people, this would be a great avenue for you to do so. Next, please. The final series that we do is called Insights, where we communicate sort of major economic trends, industry terms, and event summaries to students to help them understand jargon and sort of key industry concepts that they may otherwise have no way of getting easy explanations to. Next, please. In 2018, we launched our first offline industry engagement events called the Discovery Series, where we built young and senior professionals panels around topics that students otherwise don't have the chance to engage with often, like Smart Nation, space, cybersecurity, and we work with various industry partners like the Cybersecurity Agency most recently to make sure that these are communicating sort of the breadth of occupations available. So some of these panels will always make sure that there's private and public representation. The people sector usually has speakers represented, and we have people from a range of sort of backgrounds and experiences. Next, please. We've also brought this into schools through our Discovery Ad series with events based on topics that students want to learn more about. Next, please. We've also worked with companies to bring students into the workforce with our learning journeys with Facebook, Google, and IBM, and many more planned for this year, which unfortunately couldn't happen because of COVID, but we hope to continue with in 2021. Next, please. We've also run several dialogues with more senior individuals to share their thoughts and perspectives with individuals and students and young professionals. And if there are any of you who want to share your thoughts as well while being based abroad, I'm sure we can always find a way to do so. Next, please. One of the other things that we've done, a key flagship initiative that we've started, is the Advisory Educators Roundtable. So training teachers, ECG counselors, and professionals in education through biannual meetings that we run with the NUS Center for Future Ready Graduates. One of the key things that we do is build industry panels based on topics that the teachers themselves want to find out more about as they try to communicate occupations in this industry to students. We've covered last year, for example, ICT and healthcare. And so, if you are interested in sharing what you do with teachers and helping to make sure that they're communicating the right information to students, do get in touch with us as well. Next, please. And next year, what we'll be doing is we'll be working with the Ministry of Education to formalize a year-long support program for pre-tertiary institutions to supplement ongoing education and career guidance or ECG initiatives. So this is a year-long support package that will be offered to schools for free. We are currently looking for company sponsors to work with us on this in terms of adopting a school for a year and having your staff on the ground work with us. I know that may not be so feasible for Singaporeans based overseas, but if you know of contacts from your company in Singapore who are looking to get staff involved with a year-long CSR project, this is something that we'd be keen to explore with you too. Next, please. So we work with a range of programming partners across the 3P sectors to make sure that our work is properly informed by industry, and we're always looking for new partners to bring on if that might be interesting to you. Next, please. Yeah, our work is supported by a board. We don't just blindly throw things at the wall. We want to make sure that all our work is informed by proper industry opinion. So we consult with our board very regularly on the work that we do. Next, please. Our work has been featured. I don't want to go into this too much detail, but it's been 4 years. Hopefully we've had some traction since. Next, please. And in terms of our work offline, we've worked already directly with more than 2,000 students in about 1 calendar year. We are also, so far have worked with more than 75,000 students across all our initiatives. Next, please. And you can find out more about the work that we've done between 2016 and 2019 in our impact report at this link. I think Jasmine has just shared the link to the deck, so hopefully you'll be able to take a look at it if you're interested. Next, please. During this time of COVID-19, the Ministry of Education and the National Youth Council have asked us to take a more active approach in providing supplementary programming to students affected by COVID in terms of especially those who are currently undergoing home-based learning. Next, please. The first thing that we did was to take our mentorship program fully online, what we call the advisory mentorship program online. And across 3 waves, we're matching more than 500 mentors with students one-on-one over a 3-month virtual industry mentorship. And for wave 3, which launches this coming Thursday, we have more than 200 mentors already registered with us. Unfortunately, we are no longer accepting registrations for wave 3 mentors. We had to complete all the registrations and paperwork last week. But we do welcome you to join us for future mentorship cycles in 2021. Next, please. And we're glad to be working with a range of mentors across the 3P sectors in the work that we do in supporting students. Next, please. Another key initiative that we've been running is called the Discovery Plus series, where we take our industry engagement events online, and we're in talks with Workforce Singapore to fully sponsor these sessions till the end of the year. These have been running weekly up till June, and from July onwards, these will be fortnightly till the end of the year. Next, please. And so far, we've run 9 sessions with almost 2,000 students attending. We cover a broad range of industries with topics coming up, including sustainability on Tuesday, international affairs, including with MFA the following week, as well as public relations and communications the week after, with some other more interesting topics like Islamic finance, maritime, law enforcement, etc. coming up in coming weeks. We are always looking for speakers to join us. So if you're interested, we would love to see how we can fit you into one of these panels moving forward. Next, please. And yeah, the sessions are coming up, and hopefully if you're interested as well, you're more than welcome to tune in to join us. These happen every Tuesday from 7:30 to 9 p.m. Next, please. Some other work that we've been doing includes mental well-being and mental health support for students in partnership with the Institute of Mental Health and other partners to make sure that students and young professionals get the support they need during these difficult times. And we're launching a new vertical of virtual programming as well called Ask Me Anythings, where we profile more sort of mid-career to senior leaders in terms of having them take questions from students and young professionals in a more candid and informal sharing. These will be running every fortnight in July onwards. And so if you think you have a profile that could be interesting to feature, we'd love to see how we can fit you in as well moving forward. Next, please. So how can you help? Well, at the moment, we run a community called the Advisory Professionals Network with more than 500 members registered. And it's a community of young professionals who volunteer their time with us on a monthly basis as speakers, mentors, interviewees, and coaches. We try our best to make sure that we are sort of making this as easy to commit to for working professionals. So in the sign-up form that you will see at advisory.sg/working-professionals, you have the option of indicating how many hours a month you'd be willing to give between 1 to 6 hours a month. And so we want to make sure that you are giving based on the amount of time that you have available, that we're not overtaxing you. And you also have the option of letting us know what roles you'd be interested in playing. So there are 4, as we mentioned: being a speaker at one of our events, mentoring students, being an interviewer and sharing your story, and coaches. And coaches are the ones that we really need moving forward. And I'll share a bit about where we're going with this. So at the moment, over the first 2 waves of our mentorship program, we've had more than 1,500 students apply in to be mentored. But we only have a limited number of slots with our mentors. And that means that so far we've had 457 students matched. That leaves about 1,000 plus students, or about a sort of two-thirds ratio of students who were unable to be matched. In many cases, this is also because some of these students are not what we call mentee ready. They are not at a stage where they can benefit from a long-term sustained mentorship program that requires a high amount of initiative, a high amount of self-awareness, and a high degree of sort of industry awareness or research that they've already done. But we are committed to ensuring that any student who wants to get support during this time is provided that support. To that extent, we are launching a new online platform called Guidance, which we'll be piloting and launching with the National Youth Council and other partners in August. And what we'll be doing is providing a platform where students can book 30-minute industry consultations every month with our coaches. And our coaches are working professionals who list their profiles on the platform and provide a number of slots every month that they're willing to talk to a student on a predefined topic, for example, discussing CVs and resumes, cover letters, doing interview prep, talking about a student's career options, talking about the working professionals' background in industry. And we're really looking for coaches who can join us in this effort as we pilot this. And we'll be piloting this in August with all the students who are unable to get matched during waves 1 to wave 3. So this is students who want to get personalized support, have not gotten personalized support so far, and could really benefit from having, you know, the time to speak to working professionals as we bring them along the path to become mentee ready, find their own mentors, find mentors with us, as well as take their journeys forward. So we hope you might consider joining us and supporting the work that we do. And the only link, I suppose, that would be relevant for you today is advisory.sg/working-professionals, and you'll find more information about the program and what we do there. These are some of our contact details and links. I was going to put our link tree, but there's way too many things on our link tree at the moment. So some relevant information. Please reach out if you have any questions at all, and I'd be happy to take any sort of questions or follow-ups if you have any. And thank you for your time. Thank you for having me today. And back to you, Jasmine.
Thank you. My gosh. First of all, that was super fast, Eugene, and I know we gave you a short window as well, but this is so exciting. I wish we had this resource when I was growing up. The glimpse into different careers available is amazing, because now, having gone through much of my career, I kind of wish I had learned about some of these different options as well, and had these mentors along the way. So this is brilliant. Well done, Eugene. I have a question. How is this funded? What is this initiative? What's the cost of this initiative for people wanting to participate?
Sure, thanks. And so we call this like having a full-time job without getting paid, because we don't charge. We don't charge any student who comes to our programs. And so that creates a conundrum for us. We don't charge students because we believe that even a $2 digital payment can be a barrier. Imagine you're a 14-year-old student, you don't have a credit card or a debit card, you need to get permission from your parents. They may not want to, you know, do something like allow you to make a transaction for a provider that they've never heard of, etc. So there always is a barrier. And so we don't charge students. We don't charge schools as well, because that means only schools that have the sort of resources and already value external assistance will come and work with us, and that defeats the purpose of equalizing access. And the third one is we don't charge companies, because then they have no reason at all to work with us. So we don't charge for any of our programs. We're funded largely by government grants at the moment. We are also doing private sector fundraising. So we've brought in our first $10,000 commitment, and we're working with various donors and companies. We are also transitioning to a foundation model. So we'll be working based off sort of company donations and sort of large-scale sponsors moving forward with our programs, particularly, for example, the schools pilot, where companies will adopt a school with us, and that allows us to not just ensure that our funding is directly meeting needs, but also making sure that we are accountable for any funding that we get, because it's directed to a specific programming pillar each time that we raise some funds for it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you. The reason I'm asking is because we want to ensure that this is a sustainable program, right, for you guys as well, because it's such a great idea, but oftentimes great ideas like this sometimes have difficulties thriving because of funding reasons. So definitely want to see this keep going. Amazing. Well, got your contact information here, and I've shared your this deck with the population here as well, and I'm sure many of us are interested in being part of this initiative as well. I did sign up, just so the folks on the call here know. So at least I've taken that first step, and I'm encouraging the rest of us here to do what you can to be coaches, right, Eugene, you're saying as well? It's great. And I know we have a number of students here as well, so hopefully this is useful for us all as a resource. I've got a few comments in the chat window saying that it is useful, so brilliant. Thank you, Eugene. super privileged to have you here. And I know at really short notice, very well put together presentation and helpful for us to understand what you're doing here. And this is completely new to me. I can't believe you guys have been running for the past couple of years, but it's brilliant how much you've grown. So congratulations, Mo Yujun here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine, and all the best to everyone in the US. Do stay safe, take care, and if there's anything that you need from our end as well, do reach out at any time, especially for the students, and have a great rest of your evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Yujun. Take care. Bye for now. All right, everyone. So with that, let us move on to the next topic for us this evening. The featured topic of the week is on education. Now, many of us have kids who are at home or are in the midst of educating ourselves too, and we're trying to consider different summer options, right? As we are now sheltered in place, a lot of our internships have collapsed. Some of us, for example, with school-going children, are trying to figure out what kind of summer programs we should be having them in, those of us who have kids in college or applying for college are super concerned about the path ahead, given that the APs, the SATs, and all that have been tremendously delayed. And so we're all wondering what's going to be part of that education process. So fortunately, this evening, we have some experts on the call with us, but let's just get a glimpse of our folks on the call in terms of the participants here and where we are as a community. So many of us here, at least for this particular call, given that it's the selection of folks who are interested in college and more serious education levels, I think most of our kids are sort of in the high school range, but certainly we have a core number in lower levels, right? Younger than first grade, elementary, middle school. And a fair number of us do not have kids because, of course, this is a combined session with the advisory session. Some of us are students ourselves, so that makes a lot of sense. In terms of educating our kids while in this shelter-in-place period, many of us have been having a lot of challenges, right, at home. I think we talked about this in our mental health session as well, where some of us are basically reporting that our children are getting bored easily. We have to work, and it's really hard to find ways to entertain the kids, and the kids are now addicted to computer games. Even if they weren't before, they now are, and it's hard to have them go to school while turning on the computer because you don't know if they're actually playing a computer or actually studying at the same time. So that's been a problem. And then there are a few of us here who have difficulties finding options online as well. And I think, as we move forward in summer planning, some of us are really interested in learning more about options available. Some of us have identified different things from an academic or sports or non-academic perspective. I think I see, a dearth of sports activity. This used to be something we used to send a lot of our kids through, right, over summer. But I think because of shelter in place, that's been hard to do. So many of these programs have not seen revival yet, right? No basketball, no baseball. So it's been hard to sort of get that underway. And I see a fair number of us still considering options for summer. Many of us, of course, are interested in extracurricular activities, trying to learn more about that. And right now, as we're looking at getting information, most of us are just going online to look for this information or getting them from schools or friends and family, right? Such as forums like this. So as we go through this presentation, if you guys have suggestions, please feel free to keep this active and interactive online in the chat window as well. Moving on as well, those of us with kids in the higher levels of education are concerned about the whole SAT, ACT dynamic, right? And the trends there, given that standardized testing has been really hard to do. And as we know, even the AP test recently didn't go that well because many students were unable to even submit their exams, and it was hard to invigilate in a very, since it was an honor-based system, right? So with that in mind as well, many of us are concerned about how to build that strong admissions profile. I mean, those of us with high school kids, and I have, a pair of twins who are actually heading in that direction in June. They're juniors this year, so they're heading towards senior year. That's been a core concern because many of the activities, like one of my sons is actually a runner. He's not been able to take part in many of the varsity races, right, which would have help place him in some of these different things. So how do you then build that strong admissions profile when you don't really have activities, right, that you were counting on doing, or the grades that you were counting on getting in this very critical time? And then for those of us who have younger children, how do we build towards that profile and start to, you know, get into some of these interesting activities, right, that would help our kids prepare forward? So we're very privileged and lucky to have with us this evening some experts who can help us with the roadmap for college planning. We have with us Dan and Clarissa. Clarissa is a Singaporean, Dan is not, but we are adopting him this evening. Dan, tell us more about yourself. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Jazz. Good evening, everybody else. I hope you can hear me okay.
We can, thank you.
I'm very excited to be here. I guess in brief, I've worked with Flex College Prep for over 10 years now, and I'm a principal consultant. I'm also our VP of Admissions Consulting. It just means that I lead our admissions consulting team for the whole company, so internationally and within the state and nationally as well. Just a very sort of brief background, excuse me. So I immigrated to the US in 9th grade, and I went to a typical kind of public high school that was extremely competitive. And I think one of the things that I quickly learned was I didn't really understand the admissions process. I don't think I had good advice. My parents certainly didn't understand. And I kind of muddled my way through. Fortunately, I did fairly well, went to UC Berkeley, and eventually graduated there and went on to law school. I worked at a tech startup company. But along the way, I realized that, very often we're given advice, and parents and friends and family try to give you suggestions about what to do. But if you don't really have a good understanding about what colleges may be looking for, and I'm really stressing colleges a lot, really more as sort of the, how do I say this? This is sort of the path you have to understand, because whether you're in high school, middle school, elementary, or perhaps younger, sometimes as parents, you've got to make decisions: public school versus private school. Do you support sports? Which types of activities? So I think understanding this, would have been helpful for myself. And I guess I'm very hopeful tonight that the information that I'm here to share, Clarissa and I are here to share, might be of use to some of the families as they plan. Because ultimately, when you leave today, I hope you have a better understanding and maybe have a better sense of what you need to be able to do to reach your goals, whatever those might be.
Well, Dan, thank you for joining us, and go Bears. Somehow you chose the right school. Well done.
Go Bears.
All right, Clarissa, thank you for introducing us to your wonderful organization. Clarissa is actually one of our leaders in Southern California, living, I believe, in LA region. But Clarissa, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to Flex. You're on mute. I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I am a proud product of Singapore. So just share a little bit the personal part of me and my family. I was born and raised in Singapore and left home about 2 decades ago. Very, very blessed to have traveled around the world. I've been to more than 40 countries now, still counting. And share a little fun fact about myself. At some point of my travels, I was working in Central Americas, and it attracted some Singapore press. So a few years ago, if you Google my name, you'll see some articles come out. I was coined the most adventurous lady in Singapore. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well,
the flame. So go ahead, humor. You see a picture of me here. I prayed for a job in Florida. Had a Singapore friend working there, but he found me a boyfriend instead. So I married an American guy. We since then has resettled, travel to and work in many places. The product of our love story are 2 beautiful boys. They are a little bit older than the photos now, and so that's my family history. Now I want to share a little bit about what I do at Flex. So I'm engaged to be the enrollment director. Most of us in California know that we have a large Asian community here. So my territory, I and task help with our Asian here. We have a lot of Indian, Korean, Taiwanese, and Chinese. And often this group of people are split into two camps. The first group are your recent immigrants, and maybe someone like Dan, you know, who's transported here from somewhere else, and they could sometimes be find themselves struggling with the language barrier because they're not familiar with this foreign academic environment. And in the second group, some of us may identify here, they not necessarily struggle with the language, but the parents themselves did not graduate from the local US system. So they find it daunting and sometimes intimidating to navigate this process. So at Flex, what we do is to aim to take out the stress and get out. So we provide two main services to our families here. And the first part is academic service, and this is what most families are familiar with and easier to understand. This we do test preps, your ACT, SAT, tutoring, which is what in Singapore we are very familiar with what the tuition center offer. We do enrichment services for our pre-collegiate students, curricular activities, workshops, seminars, all these to build up their essential skills. And then the second part is the consulting part. So I'm going to hand over to Dan to share more about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Clarissa. Once again, thank you for connecting us to the organization. All right, Dan, let's go for it. Tell us more.
All right, let's get started, everybody. Again, thank you for having me this evening. I know that from the survey, many of you will have high school age students, middle school, and you know, some younger. I realize that some of you may not have kids, you know, yet. Some of you just don't have kids, but I think understanding what's happening in college admissions might inform you, you know, both, I guess, in many interesting ways, but of course, probably most relevant to families who are planning for college at some point. So, love to do an overview. I think to put it all together after that, we'll take a quick look at 2 student profiles, see how they did it successfully. I warn everybody ahead of time, these are very successful students. I don't mean to say, in fact, that everybody can do what they did, but certainly I think we can learn a lot from this because it's very instructive. And then I'd like to look at some early planning perhaps and some suggestions, you know, for all of you out there, and then leave some time for Q&A at the end so that if you have any questions, we'd love to answer that. So if we could progress to the next slide. Okay, so I think what we have here in front of you, and I think most families and most people are probably familiar that there are public universities like the UCs, and then there are going to be private universities like USC in California, Caltech, Stanford is another very famous one. I think the important thing to understand first is how do universities view, I guess, how do they review applications and applicants? If you take a quick look at these pie charts, you'll see that on the public side, there's a very heavy emphasis on GPA and test scores. And, you know, I think that's pretty easy to understand because what the colleges are trying to do is have a fair system, one that's a bit, you know, more objective. And that way, you know, they can, because they're funded by the state, they can try to make sure that everybody has equal access. And then, you know, if we look at this, it's about a 70%, perhaps even more, sometimes 80%, depending on the institution. They'll take a look at your college essays, they'll look at your extracurricular activities, and then they're going to try to figure out, you know, I guess, how well you did in your context, meaning what's your personal story, what are your interests, what are your specialties. On the private side, this is pretty different because in the private schools, what we see here is that it's actually an even split between the GPA and testing and the college essays and the activities. And in fact, what I'd suggest is that it's not so much, you know, even a 50-50 split, although it's a distribution. It's better to think of this as a 2-step process. And maybe if we can go to the next slide, when we think about this this kind of 2-step process, what you will notice, or I guess if we take a step back and say, private schools will basically look at the academic factors. They'll try to take a look and understand, are you going to be capable in this first step of handling the academic level at our school? So whatever the level is, it could be an Ivy level school, it could be a small liberal arts college, it could be a Catholic Jesuit school, but they're basically going to say, in your GPA, in your courses that you've taken, in your standardized tests, how have you performed academically? Because we want to make sure that you're going to succeed. And then if you're qualified, so typically everybody at a private school who's qualified, you know, they'll go on to the step 2. And then step 2, they're evaluating the non-academic components. So they'll take a look at your activities, they'll look at your college essays, They'll review letters of recommendation. And if the school offers an admission interview, they'll also be using that. Now, I think it's really important here because one of the first questions that I get inevitably, and I think we've all been there. So students, if you're on this call, parents, if you're on this call, and for those of you who are no longer in school anymore, maybe you can think back. But if we actually ask this question, well, how do we actually compare these subjective qualities? Because once we get to non-academic, who's to say, or I guess, how do we compare? Is journalism, is speech and debate better, right? Is it better to spend your time on perhaps arts, maybe sports? Should you be doing mock trial, speech and debate? Or should you be doing research and computer programming, right? Many students do engineering and robotics. So how do we actually compare those things, right? And I think that's actually sort of the biggest job that students you have, and parents, this is what your students will face one day, which is oftentimes I ask families to think about the fact, imagine if an admissions officer were to ask you, so whether they're from a private university or a public university, I'm going to be accepting one last student from your school, and they happen to be from your class. The question what you would have to answer is, why should I take you? So if an admissions officer asked the student that, right, why should I take you compared to your peers? I think how you answer that is very important, because fundamentally what you're trying to do, and the way that I like to describe this is, your job should really be to try to help the institution, the college, the university see that you are the best fit for them. Now, what does that mean? And aren't all these schools very similar? In many ways, yes. But one of my favorite examples that I think I like to share is that I'm not sure how many families are familiar on this call, but if you think about Georgetown, Santa Clara, Boston College, those colleges, how are they all similar? Well, they're Catholic Jesuit schools. They have a very high emphasis on service, right, on social engagement, and they look for people with high character that will go out into this world and sort of, change it, if you will, for the better. And it's not to say that schools like Northwestern, USC, and Stanford don't look for the same thing, because oftentimes they do. But I think Northwestern, Stanford, USC, these are national research institutions. So for them, research is actually a very, very important part of their mission. They strive to educate leaders, of course, people who are very smart, who are very engaged and dedicated. But again, these very kind of distinct qualities oftentimes, right, are what you're trying to show with regard to, look, I fit your school very well. Here are the activities that I've done. And this is the case that I'm making in my story, in my college essays. Now, if we advance to the next slide. Okay, so I think here's where maybe the night turns for some of you. And I always say this a lot. I try to repeat myself, quite often. These stats are quite scary. And before anybody faints, these are not averages. These are the 75th percentile. So in the middle 50%, this is the top of that middle 50%. But I think it's really important to share. And, we hope that the reason why we use this number, and particularly on this call, I think it's actually very relevant to this community, and our location, because if you are coming from, a competitive area like the Bay Area or similar, if you're typically an Asian student, who is not an underrepresented minority, meaning you have a history of academic success in your community, then you're going to be compared to stronger students. So if we take a look at the very top line, Berkeley, there's a GPA of 4.3. And this is, of course, the UC weighted, which I can explain if anybody has a question. But basically, it's a 4.3, 75th percentile average with ACT at 35, SAT at 1540. UCLA is, in fact, the GPA is actually higher, 4.31. And as you go down the line, you see that the middle three UCs, even Santa Barbara, Irvine, and Davis, which I found shocking. And I did this presentation 2-3 years ago. That was the first time that I had said it. But now I have to include Riverside, Santa Cruz in that conversation with regard to 75th percentiles being over 4.0. And if you look on the ACT and SAT, it's pretty incredible. 30, 32, 33, 1380. We see 1480, 1490, and 1380, 1450. So what I think that's important here to understand is as you look at the UCs, it's just getting more and more competitive. And I think the important part is I'm not here saying that, oh, you need to get into Berkeley or LA, or that maybe San Diego is better than other UCs. Depending where your student is, what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, at the very least, academically, you need to be very, very close to these numbers, because if you remember on the pie chart, public universities and specifically the UCs tend to give about 70 to 80% of weightage to the academic factors. Because we're coming from very competitive areas, they'll use the essays, the activities to try and differentiate between students, but that's only going to be worth 20 to 30%. Now, if we go to the next slide and we take a look at the private universities, I think, again, it's a fairly similar story. And I think using Stanford maybe perhaps as the most difficult or one of the most difficult universities, this time it's an average GPA because of the way it's reported, but it's out of 4.0, which means it's not weighted. So the 75th percentile, 3.96, ACT at 35, SAT at 1540. And these aren't so different, at least with regard to ACT, SAT, they're not so different from the top UCs. And again, I think that's important to always point out because, as I mentioned, private universities are only going to look at these numbers as a sort of first step. It's not a deciding factor. It's just, can you handle the level of work that we require? And if you can, then we move on and we evaluate you, on the rest of the non-academics that I mentioned. But I think what's also good to see here, or I guess what's going to help calibrate for families, is when we take a look at schools all the way down. So whether you have an interest in the Claremont colleges like Pomona, Harvey Mudd, given examples, they don't report the GPA, but we can see that the ACT score is 35, SAT scores are very high, 1530, 1550. And even schools like Pepperdine and Santa Clara, which are ranked in the US News, ranking approximately in the 50s, right? So let's just call them 50 out of 100. Even then, we're requiring a 32 ACT, 1430, 1440. So again, very, very competitive. Now, we're always looking to that 75th percentile. And I think the takeaway story is, no matter what level of school you're applying for, number one, it's extremely competitive. Colleges are looking for fit. So that's actually very, very important for you to consider. And for private schools, you need to apply broadly because you can see how competitive even a school like USC is now. I think, parents, if you're on this call, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but parents a long time ago, we always used to joke that USC was much easier to get into, and that's just not the case anymore. In fact, it's climbed, ahead in terms of US News rankings of UCLA and Berkeley even, and they continue to have a very low acceptance rate, hovering around 14% to 16%. So again, incredibly competitive. Now, if you're a student and you've seen these slides and you think, gosh, it's, UCs are incredibly difficult, private schools are incredibly difficult, the honest answer is yes, admissions has become much more competitive. So I think it's always wise to take a step back and say, well, what are my goals? What's my student's level? What are my priorities? And then number one, to apply broadly. And if it's possible, so whether you're an 11th grader, going to be a senior, 10th grader, 9th grader, etc., take stock of where you are, and let's start to think about, perhaps, well, what can I do? And if these are my goals, perhaps, what should I be thinking about? Okay, so let's kind of, let's progress. Jazz, if we go to the next slide, let's take a look at what some students have done. Now, again, this should scare everybody. It's meant to a little bit because I picked two students that we've worked with who graduated last year, and these are their profiles. And what we kind of broke it down into academics, extracurriculars, and then to try to show a progression. But I think it's important to look at it this way because, again, I'm picking some of our most successful students because if you're aiming for, some of you might be aiming for top level schools, this is what it's going to take now, especially if you're from a competitive area. So, we can't be fooled into thinking anymore that a perfect GPA, right, and perfect test scores are the only requirements, right? There are many, many things that you need to do. And it's certainly not as simple as having, one sport, one music, one activity, one leadership, one volunteer. We've got to think about how to put things together cohesively. So both of these students, one biology, one political science, to represent a STEM, one to represent the social sciences and humanities. You can see both students have incredible unweighted GPAs. So both of them are rock stars there. Same goes for their ACT and SAT scores, top 1% respectively, both of them. And the AP exams, I think this part, again, is going to actually cause a lot of people to be nervous depending where you are. So I'll try to preempt some concern here in questions and just say, if you note for both of those students, they did 14 exams, that's the bio student, so all 5s and only 1 4. And then for the political science student, 12 APs and all of them 5. Now, I think so here's I guess I'm trying to be very careful how I say this. If I were to suggest, or I guess for families who are aiming for Ivy level schools, I would say that by the time you're graduated, or I guess including your senior year, you should be aiming for 8 to 11 at a minimum AP exams, depending on your school. So I recognize, many of you, your schools won't offer APs. Maybe it's an IB curriculum. Maybe you go to a private school and they don't have any AP exams at all. Or conversely, you might go to a school where most of your classes, or many of them starting freshman year, are in fact APs. So I think an average, if I said, kind of California public high schools, I'd say if you're somewhere in the range of 5 to 8 APs, you're doing a really good job, okay? Now, 8 to 11, I would say from a public high school makes you very competitive for an Ivy. But, if you can do more because there are some students, you should be thinking about that. And I'll also make just one quick note here, because I think I forgot to mention it a bit earlier. Primarily, all colleges, not 100%, but about 99% of colleges, all compare you as a candidate to other students from your school and from your class. And I say this and I stress this because very often, I grew up in Fremont, in the Bay Area. So some families say, well, my son or daughter goes to Irvington. How is he or she going to be compared to somebody who goes to Mission San Jose, American, Washington, Kennedy, respectively? Same thing. What about Palo Alto High School? What about Cupertino High? What about Harker? What about Bishop O'Dowd? What about College Prep? There are so many schools. Colleges really look at you in your context to understand both the opportunities you had, but perhaps exactly also, kind of the obstacles you might have faced. So I hope, that's also good and bad news for some of you, I believe, but colleges will first evaluate you from your class, then they'll consider you in context, compared to all applicants and all candidates at a higher level of review. But your job as a student right now or as a parent, get through high school first, be one of the top candidates, no matter which school you're applying to, out of your high school class. That's the first step. Now, jumping back in, hopefully you're still with me. SAT subject test. So this one is a very interesting kind of topic point, and I'm just flagging it here because if you see both students, they both took, biology student took 4, the political science student took 3, and they all scored very, very well. 800s, and there's one 770 among the 7. I think the thing I wanted to point out here about subject tests is you don't need to do 5, 6, 7, 8. In fact, our recommendation would be, you only need to do 3 and, maybe 4 at most, just depending on, if you're a strong science student, you might be able to get away with a few more. But I did want to point out that there's a lot of breadth in both students, that the subject tests look very similar, meaning there's a math, a science, and a history. I think that's always important to try and show, no matter which major and what direction you go in, can you show some more kind of, I guess, equal excellence in multiple disciplines that can help your chances. Now, I said this is very controversial because MIT recently announced, this was kind of big news, they're actually dropping the requirement for the SAT subject tests. And not only dropping it, they're not going to consider them. So they're not even going to allow you to kind of submit it. They're not even going to take a look at this. And this is some of what's been happening lately with many, many colleges. And it's so fresh. Rice University, I believe their exact verbiage is not just, I guess, not recommended anymore. So it's not required and not recommended. And I think, so on one hand, it's good because this is sort of helping our students. We don't have as much stress, thinking about, we need to do all these exams. But on the other hand, it's actually something that might hurt many of you on the call tonight. And it's not just because we're, I guess typically Asian and then you do well on exams, so, kind of boost your chances. Actually, I think it's because very often some students who genuinely have an interest or a passion, if you can use this data point, it does really help people select out some of the stronger students from a very competitive class. So if you go to Lynbrook High School, for example, if you go to Saratoga, super competitive. So the more data points you can give, an admissions officer to help make a decision, that's going to help them because they already know, well, gosh, there's so many kids with, very strong grades, depending on the school respectively. Their SAT or ACT scores are very good. So anyway, this one, I still advise students because there's many schools making it optional. And though there are just a few that are dropping the requirement, it's still advisable to do. So if you're out there, I would suggest try to do 2 still. And then, if you can, 3. And I'll actually also just take this moment really quickly here to say, One other big change that was announced recently is the UCs. So the University of California recently announced that they're going to make ACT and SAT, I guess, optional and certainly not required for this class of 2021. And the same thing for class of 2022. Then they are trying to phase out, so they'll no longer use it for admissions purposes as of class of 2023, 2024, while they develop their own exam. Some colleges like Caltech, so Caltech specifically also has just recently dropped the SAT and ACT, like they will not even consider it in admissions. But I'm just suggesting, well, I guess I'm highlighting it here because I wanted to use this slide and this time to say to students and families, you still need to take the SAT, you should still take the ACT. Things may change in a year from now, things might change, in 2 years, or who knows, the way that the world has changed, maybe in just a few months. But until that time, with everything that we've seen and the way the colleges are still using it, especially if you're coming from competitive schools, because a lot of these changes are not, meant to kind of, how do I say this? They're intended to not disadvantage students who may not have the opportunities. But if you're from an area where you have that opportunity and every other student in your class is taking it, it is certainly to advantage to finish the SAT and ACT. So students, you should still do this. Okay, now jumping back to these two students, if you look at their honors and awards, very, very strong. I would say this is placing them in that national conversation. On the bio side, it's a second place county science fair and a USA Biology Olympiad semifinalist, a USABO semifinalist. Political science was a math and AME qualifier, so not quite at the math Olympiad level, but just below that. And then did debate on the national and state, kind of level, and won some tournaments or placed. So this was a very strong student. If you can go to the next slide, we'll take a look. In their activities, we see that on the biology side, Model UN Secretary General, Development Director, President of the Science Olympiad Club by the time the student was in 12th grade, Boys and Girls Club as a tutor, from 12th, 11th, and 10th grade, participated in chess, as well as HOSA, which is a club that explores sort of that pre-med health sciences area. And I think this student is not just STEM focused, so we see a lot of deep involvement over several years, but really culminating in the last couple of years in some strong leadership positions. Same thing on the political science side, debate captain, math team president by the time in 12th grade, teen support peer advisor, 12th, 11th, and 10th grade, and then also a youth orchestra principal violist. I think what's important to point out here is, yes, these kids are doing a lot. And again, I would say that these are the very sort of top kids. So perhaps if you're a student, you're looking at this saying, gosh, like there's no way my kid could be doing this. Or maybe you can say, students, if you're here saying, this is just so much, I can't manage all this and my coursework. I think what's important, again, taking a step back just to say, try to be as involved as you possibly can be. Look for leadership opportunities in the clubs or activities that you're participating in, just like these students did. So even if you had half of what these students have, or only a third, I still think that's very strong, and it's certainly going to help you. Now, both of these students, again, were truly excelling. And I think one other very important kind of lesson to take from both of them, you can see some coherence in what they did. So HOSA, kind of a pre-med, pre-health, right? Being a tutor in math and sciences, Science Olympiad Club, all going towards biology, right? On the political science side, we see debate team captain, being a peer advisor. I think all of those are really good activities that kind of go towards the study of political science. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll see some of their progression and development. Let's see, that's it. Thank you so much. So with their student profiles, we look here at the progression. So in 9th grade, the biology student simply just studied for the biology Olympiad, did family vacations. Then in 10th grade, started doing hospital volunteering a little bit throughout the year. But that summer after 10th, went to Cosmos, which is a very competitive STEM summer program. And then 11th grade, during the school year, decided to be a TA for an advanced research class, did a high school STEM research preparation program for 9th and 10th graders, at his school. And then also that following summer, research mentorship program, which is at Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, which is a very, very, again, competitive program. On the political science side, student went 9th grade, did a summer debate camp in SAT prep. So nothing kind of, super fancy, they weren't doing something very exotic, but kind of built-in fundamentals, if you remember, to help become a stronger debater and perhaps better equipped. Then in the 10th grade, did a youth advisory committee with a state, I think it's a state congressperson. And that summer also found a state senator internship. So was able to kind of volunteer for a campaign, as many of you may be able to do this summer because it's an election year and there's so much going on. And then in 11th grade, went on to UC Berkeley Psychology Lab and actually reached out to a professor. So cold emailed a professor, cold emailed over 80 professors, got a couple of replies, but eventually, managed to land one and was able to, kind of secure this research assistantship, so an internship position. Also explored youth court, and then did a special project which was at school doing mental health presentations and research for freshman class. So those freshman health classes. So he went in and just asked his health teacher, hey, I'm a peer advisor. I'd like to do some mental health presentations to explain some of the resources available to students. Would you be okay with that? So it started with 1 or 2 classes, then it became all of the freshman classes, and then it progressed, in talks, eventually got into 2 schools. And then that last summer after 11th grade, went to Boys State, and which is I guess it's a legislation or legislative program. And 1 boy and 1 girl, there's a boy state and a girl state, are nominated from each high school. So if your counselor or teacher, nominate you, or you can apply for it depending on your school's process. But, then you can participate, which is, sort of an excellent opportunity. And the student also managed to do the Yale Young Global Scholars, Politics, Law, and Economics. And again, you see with these students, a lot of coherence in their profiles. Now, again, I think the take-home message here is not that you have to do everything that they did, but remember, if you could do even half, if you can do a third, and again, if it's tailored to your interests. So you might have, an interest in art. It could be something that's more geared towards environmental science. It might be something that's history related. Think about the activities that you can start in 9th grade that will allow you to build a base that goes into 10th grade. And then in 10th grade, you actually want to explore a little bit further, and then so forth until you progress into your 11th grade and, in time to apply, so that you can all put it together in your college essays. The biology student ended up, I think, committing to Yale. So he got into Yale, and of course, many other schools. Political science student ended up getting into Stanford. So of course, these were, again, very decorated. I think both students, what's important also, why I chose these profiles. Yes, I know these are very scary and they did a lot, but they're also kind of normal in some way. And what I mean by that is, I can truly tell you neither of them were kind of elite level musicians. They weren't athletes. They didn't have some uber talent. They didn't win some of the most prestigious science competitions, or, they weren't published, they didn't write a book, if you will. So they worked very hard, and I think they were so genuine, and this came across in their applications. That's ultimately what made them successful. Now, what does this mean for you? I think if we can take a look at the next slide. So we'll start talking about, well, for those of you at the different ages, I just put together a few, samples. And, again, I think what's important here, number one, for those of you in elementary school first, I wouldn't stress out too much, to be very honest with you, about getting into the right program, getting into the right camp. The first thing is, can you help, can you raise students who are curious? Do they have interests? Can you expose them perhaps to a lot of different areas? So for example, maybe it might be art, it could be sports, more reading, something coding or math related. And again, very, very basic. So to help you with that, and middle school students, you might benefit from some of these too. There are programs like ID Tech Camps, I provided the links here. There's KWON, which many of you may have already heard or perhaps you already utilize, but this is a strong math development program that begins as early as age 3. Johns Hopkins, the Center for Talented Youth, this is one of the very famous programs that does a very good job with the humanities and the social sciences, but also the STEM programs as well. It does require you to actually apply and take some sort of testing. So, Hopkins, the CTY program at Hopkins is very competitive. But even if you didn't do any one of these, I think some really good suggestions would be reading and deciding. For example, some of our students are actually deciding to read the entire, sort of quote unquote top 50 or top 10 or top 20, depending, what level, the recommended book list, for teens, like the New York Times best 100 books or best 50 books. Some students are building, kind of planting a vegetable garden in their backyard with their parents. right? Some students are actually helping to paint or repaint the house or build their own tree house in the backyard. So all of these are very viable in the summer, but again, good ways for students to get hands-on, and they will be relevant. There is a way to make them relevant, with this exploration process. For high school students, I think depending on what your profile is and your goals, this is much more nuanced. For many of you, because we're really stuck, we don't have a lot of opportunities to leave the house. Jazz mentioned already that, research programs are closed, many summer camps are all closed, you can't do, music programs. So I think one of the first things to take stock in is academically, what can you do? So some of you who are about to apply to college, or if you're younger and prepared early, this is a great time to do a test prep, finish up whatever test you need to take. It could be the SAT, ACT, could be a subject test, right? Being academically strong is good. For those of you that are just interested in a new subject or want to go deeper, perhaps explore something you've always wanted to do, a community college is a great way to do it, because you can choose and elect to have a letter grade and show excellence that you can do college level work. And then there's another program called BYU Independent Study. This is all online. You can take courses here. There's a huge variety in subject area, but also BYU Independent Study allows you to be self-paced. You can do it around another schedule. You can take it as you want to, whether it's evening, finish the sections as you go. Georgetown is a more set, formal, traditional camp. I think they still have opportunities available now in their academies. They have an econ, business, pre-health, medicine, medical exploration one as well. So, take a look there if any of these, might suit you. Now, for other students as well, you might have an opportunity to do volunteering. You might have an opportunity to do internships or a job. So, for example, I have a student right now who's helping, I think, with parents to do deliveries, during the COVID pandemic. So they're out there doing food deliveries, through a volunteer organization, and some people have been able to do it through churches, through food banks. I think it really depends what's, your comfort level is and what your students can or can't do. But again, colleges are actually going to be very forgiving in this time. They're not going to be expecting students, to have done everything. They understand that you're, really limited. So I think actually taking a step back, if you're younger and you have this space and the flexibility, develop interests, but try to make them tangible. So, a project is always great, because if you built a treehouse, you can take a picture of that. You could document it, on a website or on a YouTube channel. You could show the progress. Same way, if you built a program or built an app, you have a final product that you could, display. Same thing with, again, an art project or some kind of newsletter if you wanted to start that. So I think it's a good time to really explore. Don't be too hard on yourself. But for those of you, especially if you're a bit older and you need to give yourself an academic boost, this is one of the best times to actually, again, really jump into a community college or a high school level course. Because if you can show college, especially if you were caught in that credit, no credit kind of situation, your school decided, okay, no more letter grades, then getting one more grade right before applications could be of huge, assistance. But again, that really depends on where you are. Now, I wanted to invite Clarissa, if it's okay, to kind of speak maybe a bit about Flex and what we have to offer, because we do have things that you can also explore too. Clarissa, could you join us?
Hi, you have to unmute yourself, Clarissa, in case you're starting to speak. Perfect. Thanks, Dan. That was very interesting.
Thank you, Dan. That was a great example of different kind of students we have in today's climate. It is very competitive, especially here where we are in California, and as Dan has mentioned and illustrated. So what we do here at Flex, now Dan has given some examples of some of the things we could do outside. There are a few companies out there who specialize in different kind of programs. What we do here at Flex is we have our own program. We cater for kids as young as 3rd graders all the way through to 11th and 12th grade. And what Dan has explained most part was the consulting admission part, helping high schools gain entry into colleges. So we have a few, I think, families with younger kids here. I'm going to share a little bit about our summer options. So for those who are 3rd to 8th grade, we have a very exciting summer camp coming up. And I'm going to share this. Could you look, actually, if I share a screen to show my video, could I do that?
Go ahead. Great. We see you sharing something.
Okay, good. All right, this is the first one.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessica and I'm an instructor with Flex. I'm really excited to work with all of you on the basics of English grammar. By the end of this course, you'll feel really comfortable with breaking down a sentence into all of its building blocks. Why is grammar important? Grammar is really the foundation of the English language. We string our sentences together with all of these moving parts in order to make sense, to be clear. When you feel good about grammar, you're going to have a much easier time with your reading comprehension. You're also going to be a stronger writer, a stronger speaker. So I'm really excited, and let's get started.
Okay, we have another one here is scratch coding as well.
Hi everybody, my name is Brian and I'm a program director here at Flex College Prep. I'm excited to introduce to you and teach the Scratch Decoder programming series. This course is intended for elementary and middle schoolers who want to get a head start on learning some basic concepts of computer science. It is designed to help students work independently and think critically, while providing the necessary and support so that they successfully learn the material. A wide variety of projects and games, students will come up with creative solutions to challenging assignments. Ultimately, students will be able to use these skills to create anything they can imagine in Scratch. I hope to see all of you in the Scratch Decoder programming class, and I'm excited to be your guide on this journey into programming.
Okay, sorry, I meant to open that bigger, but didn't manage to do that. So that's just two of our program for the younger kids during the summer camp. We have grammar, essay writing, and then the scratch coding that you just saw, and also one is the public speaking and debate. Most of our instructors, yeah, thank you for showing the timetable. So I want to share with you, this is how my son Summer's gonna like. I think some of us with younger kids, it has been very trying for the working adults because shelter in place is not for everyone. Not everyone is able to, divide the time between work and separate that with family. So I personally find myself, my kids, the level of academic rigor and standard drop during shelter in place, despite the fact that we have distance learning. So what I decided is to combine some fun and academic learning for them to pick up during some 9 to 12. My kids are parked in this summer camp and they do different things throughout the day. And parents can expect a tutor, a professor working with them, teaching them through the videos and the interaction with games and activities. So that's for the younger kids, very exciting. So those videos, you could look at them again, and that I just flashed was on our website. And I wanted to add that because as a staff, as a Flex staff, this is fun because Singaporeans, we love special deal and discount codes. I get a family and friends discount, so I'll be happy to post a code later for you guys to get a little deal. And we all love deals, why not?
That's right. I'm glad you count us among your friends, if not family. So thanks, Clarissa.
Tonight, I just adopted another 30 families here. So
awesome.
And then for our older kids here, we have some also, some wonderful summer options. We have a wonderful group of world-class instructors teaching with us. Some of them have been with us for a while. Some of them we actually have engaged from outside. And why so? I want to highlight especially the second one, the Flex research methodologies. if you have children, kids from 9th to 10th graders, this is for you. Now, a lot of us, we know that, you know, there are lots of STEM-based programs out there. It's really easy to find robotics, science, math, Olympiad programs like this in the summer. But often or not, we find that when it comes to humanity-based, humanity path, they are not as clear. So our curriculum team has come up with what is called the Flex Research Methodologies course, from FRMC. And this course is really interesting for 9 to 10 graders who are curious and ambitious, and those who want to really learn the basics of thinking and conducting research, because a lot of times by the time they get to college, they realize that missing this skill is a huge disadvantage. So what we are empowering our kids is to develop research skills and then help competitive advantage when applying to future summer programs, and more importantly, to give them a competitive advantage in applying and succeeding when they get into when they get to college. In essence, when they do this course with us, they are able to demonstrate to the professors they have been taught such skills. They are able to learn research and understanding framework and concepts. So professors usually like that, and I say her head because she's telling me I heard her say that there are students in her class who can't even spell. So here we are talking about research, right? So we put our kids and our students one step ahead or two steps ahead among their peers, and how we help them stand out. So last but not least, I just want to share about our webinars for our high schoolers, you know, interested in learning more about what Dan has said. We have special topics and seminars set up to educate our parents, to share what we learned from our past experience, as well as keeping our current families up to date in all the changes. So for example, there's one coming up, and the focus topic is about, should I write about COVID, you know, and why should I write about, why should I not write about, what should I include? So, and there will always be a Q&A sessions towards the end, so parents can ask questions and, you know, maybe more personal to your situation. And then for parents who are into, who are familiar, or I say, who are well-versed in Chinese, we also have a Chinese seminar, and this doesn't come about often. Our Chinese team put together this especially for most of our families who are not so comfortable in English. So it's a very different perspective, looking from their angle, and I encourage, if you are well conversed in Chinese, to join us. And that's in June 20th. I'll put in the chat box later in the afternoon.
Hey, so Carissa, just a quick question. In your earlier slide on some of the classes, are they individual classes or group classes?
Which one?
These virtual prep summer classes.
These ones, they are all different classes. Yeah, I just highlighted one because of time. I think we are a little bit running
So they are
out of time
mostly
here,
group
so
classes, as I understand, Dawn. And I think the webinars, of course, are groups, but I think those other classes Carissa indicated are mostly group classes. And I think she had a question, how many in one group? I think that also varies, yes, for some of those classes.
Well, no, right now, usually in these classes are in center, but because of COVID, everything has gone online. Literally, you know, it doesn't make much difference. It'll be like you attending a lecture in a hall. You know, one extra kid or 10 extra kids, it doesn't impact you. Now, when we talk about academics services like the tutorials and your you know, those services, then we will look at numbers. But typically, these classes in a group. With the FRMC, the Flex Research Methodologies course that I talk about, there's a lecture base, and then we split out the kids into smaller groups depending on their research topic. So you attend a lecture, and that is really, the whole course was set up sort of like a university college style. course. It is actually championed by one of our university professors who has taken this course from the college level, and we sort of break it up into more bite size for our high schoolers to digest. So it is actually a research-based course meant for college students. So the whole way its structure is very much similar to how you will study in a college. So we have a lecture and then we have a TA session following after that.
Got it. Got it. Hey, thank you very much, Clarissa. Super interesting classes for folks. And I know you are probably can answer more questions about different options out there too. But we do also, in the interest of time, have some questions that came through the chat room as well from our community. Some of them, I think, are questions for Dan. So the first one, with test scores being optional or even test blind in some colleges, what will be the admissions criteria?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think, to be very honest with you, I think colleges don't exactly know, but they are going to place a lot of emphasis, of course, on your grades, the coursework that you've taken, your extracurricular activities, and a lot of emphasis will be placed on your essays. So they're going to look at all of these other factors, beyond sort of the actual testing. But again, remember, it's optional. So for many of you, even if they say it may be, well, it's not required, I think most of the parents and the families on this call, unless your situation is very specific, you need to do it. So it needs to be done.
Next question. Thank you. Tough situation, I know. Next question on extracurricular activities, completely unrelated to your preferred course of study, such as musicians who want to do engineering.
Okay, so this one is always very tricky because I guess it depends. I'm noting that it said, talented student musician, meaning maybe you're a very talented musician. And so therefore you might be able to actually leverage your music, have a portfolio or an audition. You might have some sort of combined program where you can go in as a musician, but also study engineering. I think if your actual, and I'm going to give you, this is actually sort of the professional answer, which, I apologize in advance. It sounds very strategic. So some families, if your choice is, well, I want to go into engineering, that's what I really want to do, there might be a way to leverage a music profile to perhaps get in a little bit more and then, increase that chance. And if you get in, then you might have some opportunities to switch depending on the school. But hopefully if that student, to that question, if you're young enough, even if you only have a year, even if you only have a summer, there may be a couple of things that you can do to really help that. So just as a quick example, take a community college course or, a physics class that I had mentioned. You might actually be able to build an instrument, quote unquote. I've actually had students do that in the past. So there are some things that you can do to demonstrate interest. And again, that might be a strategy to bridge this. But again, you could also apply as undecided. It doesn't mean you can't apply. If you're a talented musician who also has strong scores, you might be very qualified. But again, it's going to depend because there are some students who, again, have a little bit of both, or you saw the strong profiles. That can be very common. So I'm just trying to give you the broad answer, and hopefully in your case, if you have time, there's actually still something to do, even if it's only a year, I promise. There's things that can be done.
Interesting, thank you. We have two questions related to IB students going to the US and the kind of grades they should be expected to attain.
Okay, so this is a very, very, very good question. Now, in full disclosure, I can definitely say it's a very small percentage of students that I work with either internationally or in the States who do an IB curriculum or diploma or program. But what I could say, and I'm just doing this from memory, oh gosh, I'm gonna get in trouble because it's from memory, but if you're from an international student from Asia and you're applying for a school like the UCs, I think most of your IB scores need to be around 6, or 7. So like UCLA, let's say, or UC Berkeley. So maybe a simpler answer could be this. If you're looking to apply with IB, there is a way that you can get predicted scores. Your grades should be very, very strong because sometimes, colleges understand, depending which country you're coming from, they will have admissions officers who are specialized for that international region. So again, depending on the commensurate level, your grades have to be very strong. And there is a commensurate level of your IB scores or other scores that you would need to achieve.
That's good to know. Thank you. Next question, homeschooling. What are the best options around that? And how?
Oh gosh. Yeah, this one is going to be even more tricky. So I'll give you a sort of very general answer because one of the gold standards right now, both for homeschooling or to do online schooling is something like Stanford Online High School. Now, there are schools, there are some charter schools, there's some online schools that will allow you to do this homeschooling. I don't have all of them, and I don't have a lot of, how do I say this, strong recommendations, because each school might have a very particular type of specialty, if you will, or give the student a certain amount of flexibility or support for specializations in coursework. So I apologize, I don't have specific, sort of homeschooling options, but I do think that with COVID, this is going to be a bit more popular. Certainly more families are considering this. There are many different strategies or reasons. So from a strategic standpoint, homeschooling has its advantages and disadvantages. But I think if you can, and if, especially for the family, if it's sort of a personal choice, there might be some to check out. I'm trying to think, to be honest with you, I can't recall I think it's Pacific Grove Charter, but I can't remember the specific name. If you reach out to us, we'll be happy to connect you, Clarissa or myself, and then we'll have a response.
Great, thank you. Next question. Let's see. I think the next question here is on summer programs for kids under 12 years old. And so that is, teachers working directly, not just watching videos. I know, Clarissa, you showed a few on watching videos. Are there options for more direct interaction?
Are there directions for more interaction? Yeah, so it's all interactive. They are watching a video during the lectures, but there's always a teacher staying with them. So you don't have to worry about your kid skipping to a different screen and looking at playing computer games. So essentially, it's kind of like parking them in a school, with adult supervision, a professor or a TA supervising them.
That's good to know. Thank you. That's good to know. I know it's hard during this COVID time to come up with creative options as well. I suggest we as a community, let's continue this conversation offline as well. And because I think there are many of these options that are starting to come out, and it's good for us to continue to stay close to this as well as its evolving situation. Now, going back to Singapore schools, I don't know how many of us here are thinking of doing that, but Clarissa has some good experience having just sent her son back to Singapore as well. So Clarissa, would you like to share a little bit of some of your thoughts on what you did there?
Right, so my older son is 13 years old, so he will be Set 1 in Singapore, just finished 7th grade here. So during COVID, we sent him, this crazy tiger mom, sent him halfway around the world during the global pandemic to Singapore to continue studying there, because we didn't find the local school aggressive or rigorous enough. That's why I think, it's really important. That's before we actually look at what, the other options have here. Also because we have been looking at that option a while ago. So several factors take into play. It's painful, it's difficult, but if anyone would like to know more about how to navigate the Singapore Ministry of Education system, I think I have my hands on it now. Make some wrong buttons, press some wrong buttons and miss some opportunities, but happy to share with anyone here who like to know more. I wish, that we have a consultancy like Flex, who's advising Singaporean families here. Maybe you're here, some of us here, I know from our community, who is working here temporarily with younger kids who are perhaps going back later on and looking at putting them back into the MOE system. So, throughout my years being away for 20 years almost, we didn't have that kind of assistance. And now I think with Singapore Global, David, help me here, usually you, Overseas Singapore?
Singapore Global Network.
Thank you, Singapore Global Network. So we have more connections and more communication. Still, I think there isn't a bridge yet between parents or overseas always trying to catch up to the system over there. I've kind of like navigated as my kids grow up, so happy to share. You guys can contact me privately.
Thank you. And I see,
personally.
Thanks, Clarissa. Thank you. I also see Dawn Yuan commenting in the chat window saying that her sons are now in Singapore, St. Joseph Institute International. They're both US citizens and they moved back and started last year. So they're a little ahead of your kid and in terms of starting there. Dawn, really interesting. Love to kind of learn more about how that experience is as well. Thanks for sharing your story.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dawn has been instrumental in my decision sending my kids to. So she will be an awesome resource if she offer. Please do touch base with her as well, because she's actually on the ground there with her kids, and I think has been very positive for her.
Hi.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you.
Hi, Jasmine. Hi, everyone. Hi. Yes, my kids, we moved back. Actually, not me, but more so my kids and my husband decided to move to Singapore last year for them to, we decided to move back to Singapore partly because I'm originally from here. And so I wanted to spend more time with my folks. And so then we applied for St. Joseph Institute International School. They took the test and did the interview, and they were accepted. So because they were accepted, and so the decision was made that we were, we'll come back for the next 6 years, and that give them a chance to also learn a little bit about our roots, where I'm from, and what Singapore is like. I mean, they know Singapore, they visit Singapore once a year, but it's not quite the same when you're living here. So in terms of school fees, it's almost similar to sending my kids to private school in Los Angeles. So we just thought, at least they're here. I get to be with my family, and they get to learn about our culture and where, our roots are, So
thank you.
It's been fantastic. Yeah, they are adjusting very well too, actually. Yeah, and the Mandarin improved a lot.
I'll bet. My gosh, are they taking it as a second language? That's incredible.
No, actually, they're taking it as a foreign language.
Okay.
but still, in comparison to when they were still in Los Angeles, they cannot even speak or even understand. At least now they can read, they can write, they understand. So that's really a great improvement.
That's great.
For my standard. Yeah.
Got it. That's perfect. Hey, so Dan, with people like Clarissa and Dawn who have sent their kids back for high school, what's the re-entry process like to the United States? Is their profile going to be strengthened because they have this international experience?
Okay, so I love this because everybody's throwing me very complicated questions. So let me give you the sort of simple answer to it, and I'll do my best. So actually, the way that, at least if you're talking about admissions, what's going to happen is as the students come back, wherever they graduate from, so whatever high school they're graduating from is where they will be compared. So just for example, whether it was Dawn or Clarissa, if their students come back perhaps in 10th grade, 11th grade, and then finish off at, you mentioned LA, so one of the most famous schools, Harvard Westlake, right, or a similar school, they will primarily be compared to kids from that high school. Now, there will be a very specific reading because they're coming, with this kind of split high school experience. It's not, collectively just exclusively one high school. So I think that's important to note. Now, what's very complicated is if they graduated from a Singapore school, they would be compared in that context. But if they're U.S. citizens, they're coming through this sort of U.S. citizen bucket. If they're not U.S. citizens or California residents, potentially they come through a different bucket or with a green card. So there's actually a lot of different scenarios, but the simplest way to understand it is wherever you graduate from, whoever your peers are, that's primarily who you're being compared to, unless there's a very specific reason, or in some cases, if you transferred, for example, halfway through your junior year and you were only at that high school perhaps for a few weeks, then they're going to look at that a bit differently. But generally speaking, the high school you graduate from is who they're comparing you to understand that context.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. That's super helpful. I'm sure we'll be keeping very close touch with you, Clarissa and Dawn, on your kids' adventure in Singapore, and then all of us with Dan, to figure out how to have our kids come back to the US too. I'm almost wondering whether my juniors now in high school should be applying for National University of Singapore. So that, since nobody from the US might be applying for Singapore, So maybe that's the way to do it, because Saratoga High School is so competitive. So I don't know if they can get into college here, but maybe they need to be unique and go to Singapore. So that's an interesting findings from today's session. Thank you so much all for sharing that. I just want to move on a little bit very quickly to next thing in terms of additional resources. I just learned that we actually have Singapore Math in the Bay Area. And we have this whole franchise that one of the Singaporeans actually running in Belmont. Not only does she open her doors to students, of course, who want to keep up with Singapore Maths, you know, like, so that we can go back and be strong if we want to have that, or use it in the US, because I think it's become well-renowned in terms of our methodology for math. But she's also looking for teachers. So those of us who are on the call here who think we can teach Singapore Maths and have some background in teaching, especially in Singapore's MOE, you know, please feel free to reach out to these folks at Seriously Addictive Math as well. So I just want you guys to hear that in terms of an additional math resource for help. One more thing in terms of help, just as a community message as well as we wrap up today's session, is that unfortunately, just last night we had one of our Singaporeans got their store completely looted. So this is Spokes in Berkeley. And their store was gutted out. They have no more bikes. They're just a cycling store. So we've started a little GoFundMe collection. If you guys are interested in participating, I've just popped the link into your message window here as well. Super unfortunate with all the looting that's happening. Unfortunately, one of our Singaporean peers has been impacted by this in Berkeley. Dan, ugh. Terrible. Yeah. So 98 of us have donated so far. Any little bit would count. I mean, they have, I think any, you know, insurance and all that would take some time to come through, but they're literally living hand to mouth at this point, and just making their, you know, ends meet, right? As well. So guys, I think this has been a phenomenally interesting session with all the advice that everyone's given us across the board. It's been tremendously heartwarming to hear the speeches from the Singapore government leaders, right, on how Singapore wants to engage internationally, plus how we're going to send more of our people internationally to learn and survive and be resilient as well. So that's great, because I think it looks like we'll be seeing more Singaporeans in the Bay Area as well. And Mei Chu is just telling me her daughter is planning to apply to NUS. She's a junior too. I need to talk to you, Mei. So maybe more Singaporeans are maybe going back home, just like Dawn, Clarissa, and maybe my kids, right, to study back there as well. And Dawn, thank you for sending your information online here for us to reach out to you in case we want to send our kids back. So lots of great sharing. And Dan, thank you as well for awesome advice on admissions. I think we have your contact information here. So I know that we have condensed hours and hours of great advice into just 45 minutes. And I know we've exceeded the time here too, but it's been so interesting for many of us who are passionate about these areas, who have kids right here during this phase and super concerned. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from a lot of us too. And then finally, of course, those of us who would like to raise our hands to be mentors or coaches, right, for advisory.com, please feel free to reach out to Mok Yijun as well. To see how we can help our members out there. So with that, I'm going to wrap up very quickly with a round across our panelists. Daryl, any parting words before we end today's session?
Just a reminder to tune in to Senior Minister Tharman and DPM Heng Swee Keat, who will kind of close off the series of conversations with Singaporeans in this coming week. Thanks.
That is great indeed. I'm going to just flash up the time zones. It's 7:30, right? Singapore time as well. So
I think, yeah, let's go to the slides. Yes.
Right, 7:30. So they will be talking about stronger and more cohesive society and emerging stronger together. So this is this coming Wednesday, which would be our Tuesday. So I think we need to be careful not to miss it. But I think it's super early in the morning, right? I think as well. But definitely interesting series so far. Thank you, Daryl. Hui, anything to add before we move on to Singapore Global Network?
Nothing for me. Thanks, Jess.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And thanks for putting the summaries
Jess,
together as well together.
Hey Jess, before you close out, I don't want to miss this opportunity to everyone here. Until I've been flexibly invited to speak at today's meeting, I had no clue how much work goes into these meetings, these bi-weekly and weekly meetings. My goodness. So really hands up, big hand to Jess and team, Council, Hui Hui, David, Mark, all the moderators and all those people who participated. So thank you so much, Jess. You guys.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I mean, it's all teamwork, Clarissa, and thank you all for stepping up as well to contribute and share, right, your expertise and perspectives to the rest of the community here. It is a community. We're going through this journey together. So thank you for, to the Flex folks as well. Any parting words from Dan or you, before we close off as well?
And I also want to thank Dan because he's one of our principal consultants. So he and I, we work in the same office. Flex has we have 9 offices throughout California. And Dan and I work in the same office. So busy. Sometimes I know he's there. He come and go, but we could not talk to each other all day at a very short time.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Clarissa. You're breaking up a little bit for us, but I think we get the gist of what you're saying, Dan. Again, indeed, thanks for participating and joining us here and being part of the Singaporean community here. David, Singapore Global Net. Oh, sorry. Any words before you leave? I know Clarissa spoke on behalf, but anything from you?
Yeah, Clarissa literally took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, so thank you so much for all the hard work that you guys have been putting in behind the scenes. I think a lot of the Singaporeans tuning in don't fully appreciate it until they're involved in the session. Other than that, I also wanted to remind everyone to just be careful. So there's a second wave of coronavirus that's coming up in the US, and plus the protests have gone up again. Mm-hmm. So just be careful. I mean, just today I was in Berkeley. I was actually visiting Pearly, the bike shop. Yeah. And on the way back, wow, there was a protest at the Bay Bridge. So I had to drive one big round. But everything worked out in there. So just to tell everyone, just be safe and wherever you are.
That's a great point. Thank you. Dan, going back to you again. Any final thoughts?
Just wanted to say thank you so much, everybody, for sticking with us. It was a pleasure. Jas, David, everybody, Clarissa for connecting me. I hope if you have questions, we helped a little bit. Best of luck. I promise there's always something that you can do. So good luck to you. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Thank you. It was a pleasure too. Mark, my facilitator here, was being behind the scenes. Any thoughts before we wrap up today's session?
No, it's a really great session. I know we sometimes run a little long, but we find some good content thanks to people who give suggestions. I think we are sometimes even overwhelmed by the degree of content that we have. So keep coming with those topics and suggestions. And also I really want to thank David and SGN for actually also helping make the contacts that have brought us these speakers and enabled these sessions. It is a very cooperative and collaborative effort. Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Great teamwork. Oh, by the way, folks, we've got our sessions for next 2 weeks lined up. So in 2 weeks' time, our next speaker is actually from Golden Gate Ventures. He's going to be talking about the economy, which is a question many of you have been wondering about and worried about. And he's going to talk about investment as well. And by the way, because he's a VC, he's interested in business ideas. So those of you who want to pitch different ideas to him, this is your moment. That's why we're giving you a 2-week head start to put together your business plan, right? Because he's going to be interested to hear more about some of your ideas, anything you want to take to Singapore or to Asia to grow. You could be the next carousel that could be out there. So on that note, folks, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. Great feedback, great interaction, lots of good information. And until then, in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk soon. Bye for now. Good night. Be safe.